Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today on the podcast, should the coffee industry be preparing for the effects of the Delta variant of COVID-19 from now? Before we get started, our presenting sponsor today is the Coffee Consultants Mastermind Group by Map It Forward. The first 3-month version of the Coffee Consultants Mastermind Group was a huge success, and it's now ended. So we are, recruiting is not the right word, but we are taking registrations for our next workshop or our next mastermind group. It will run a wee bit differently. It's instead of going over 3 months, we're going to have the sessions run over 6 weeks, and it will give you everything that you need to know to start your business as a consultant in the coffee industry. So you can head to mapitforward.org/group coaching, and you will find information there on the Roasters Mastermind Group the Roasters Mastermind Group, but specifically as well, the Coffee Consultants Mastermind Group. And you will see testimonials there from people who attended the first Coffee Consultants Mastermind Group. And we've decided to make a couple of changes instead of stretching it over 3 months, it will be a weekly program for 6 weeks. All the details are there. And if you have any questions, throw them in the comments section below or hit us up on social media at iMapItForward. Now, today on the podcast, the Delta variant and our industry. Should we be preparing from now for the potential for what effects the Delta variant might have on our industry? In the previous episode, we spoke about how lockdowns are affecting the coffee industry, and repeated lockdowns have affected the coffee industry and how they've done that. We are entering a new phase of this pandemic, and it's quite a strange one. What we're noticing is that people are kind of drunk on this idea of recovery, and governments are leaning into this idea of recovery with vaccines, etc., etc. We all know what I'm talking about. No need to rehash. We're seeing it all over America. We're seeing it in a lot of other regions in the world where people are just assuming that the pandemic is for some reason over. Well, as somebody who is currently in lockdown in a country that has near to no immunity, and we have a lot of vaccine hesitancy in this country, which is, I'm not weighing in on that discussion here on the podcast, but what I am saying is that we are more affected with the Delta variant than we would have been with the previous, particularly the Alpha variant. So what we are starting to see here is that they are noticing the significant way in increase in the way this virus infects people. So this is much more airborne. We are finding here that we have great contact tracing here in Sydney. And what happens is when they find that someone is infected, they do genomic testing on the version of the virus that they have, and they're able to determine immediately, once that testing's over, what cluster they could have been a part of, and they go and retrace that person's steps, because we've got QR codes. When we go to a venue, we just check in and say that we've been there. And so the contact tracers then go contact people who have been infected, tell them to lock down, and contact the people who they may have been in contact with and get it sorted. In the meantime, what they'll do is they'll go and check how that person came in contact with the virus. So they'll look at video footage of different places that they visited. So whether it be a shopping center or a restaurant, whatever it is, and they'll try and catch the exact moment that one person may have passed it on to another person. And what they've come to realize here in Australia is that fleeting contact, so being just in the same restaurant, having never been within meters of another person, may be enough contact to give you the Delta variant. Walking past somebody in a shopping center is another way that somebody has received the Delta variant from another person. And because of this genomic testing, they can tell what cluster you were a part of. And so as a result, what happened here was in previous variants of the coronavirus, COVID-19, they would lock down suburbs. And at the beginning of this current lockdown, they locked down my suburb and a couple of surrounding suburbs. Within a few days, that was Sydney-wide. And that's because of how easily this variant spreads. Now, why is this relevant for the coffee industry? Right now, as I said, people are drunk on recovery. And that means that you are ramping your businesses up. If you're not in Australia, you are ramping your businesses up. I would encourage that because the greatest disruption is from this pandemic is coming from opening and closing and opening and closing, I would encourage proactive leadership by preparing for a smooth transition into what will happen if you are required to lock down. Because as I'm tracking the numbers of the cases of Delta for people who are in our mastermind groups so that I can be ahead of what may be happening for them locally, what I'm starting to notice is that there is an absolute increase across the world of the Delta variant, much sharper increase than there has been previously. The rate that this infects people is astronomical. More than double of what the alpha strain would infect people. And so what that means is that if we can know how we're going to transition before, well ahead of being told by our local governments or our federal governments that we have to go into a mandatory lockdown, then we'll be prepared. We'll be less likely to be hit by this fatigue that I was talking about in the previous episode. We'll be less likely to be more severely disrupted. If you can ramp up your online sales and market to your online store from now and keep that as a revenue stream for what you're doing, whether you're in lockdown or not, then when you go into lockdown, which I believe that there's a high chance that we will see another spike that causes lockdowns around the world. What I think will happen is that we will be experiencing far more disruption to our industry. This podcast and all the coaching work that we do for small businesses is focused around proactive leadership. It's about understanding how your environment, the economic environment, the physical environment, whether it be weather patterns, whatever, the geopolitical environment, how all of those things have the opportunity to affect the way that you trade and your ability to trade. And through proactive leadership and being on top of what's happening, you can kind of duck and weave so that you have a greater chance at continuing in business without being too harshly affected. And that's the objective of this podcast. It's the objective of all the coaching work that we do so that you can be self-sufficient in learning how to duck and weave these things and look for signs that are just the media hyping things versus things that are likely to affect your business long term or even more severely in the short term. Now, in an upcoming episode, we're going to be talking about quite a few of those things, particularly around shipping and the coffee supply chain. So stay tuned. And if you liked what we talked about today, please hit that like button if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on podcast listening apps, please rate this podcast and help us extend the reach of it wherever it is that you're tuning in. Peace, love, and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day.